Noswaith dda, Jenny Rathbone dwi. Very pleased to welcome you to this event, which is all part of the way in which we're celebrating International Women's Day, which is tomorrow. My name's Jenny Rathbone. I chair the Equality and Social Justice Committee, which recently published a report on childcare, which is called Minding the Future, and closing the childcare barrier facing working parents. So this is obviously one of the most important issues facing women, because we are still seeing that women are assumed to be the main carers of children, and that is reflected in the way that employers think about employing women, and most importantly, what they pay or don't pay women. So we feel as Senedd members that this is one of the most important issues that we have to crack in this 6th Welsh Parliament. So I'm very pleased to welcome Gwenclean Lansdowne-Davies, Seanette Williams, member of the committee. Jackie, your surname isn't appearing on my screen, but you're extremely welcome, and Laura Mcguire. So shall we just go in the order in which you're appearing on my screen? And if you'd like to introduce yourselves and say, you know, why you think this issue is important, and what your experience of is it today. Should we start with our 3 guests, and then I'll come to Seanette last, so that she can pick up any issues. So Gwenclean Lansdowne-Davies, would you like to introduce yourself?
A very good evening to you all. I'm Gwenclean. I work as Chief Executive of Mudiad Meithrin, and I am the chair of the Cwlwm Partnership, which represents all childcare and play providers in Wales, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening. Now, in considering the challenges facing us in terms of encouraging individuals and mothers, particularly back to the workplace, I think of that from my perspective as a mother, but also from the perspective of childcare providers, the Cylchoedd Meithrin, the day nurseries, the playgroups, and so on and so forth. And I think perhaps that the fundamental question at the heart of this challenge is, who cares? What are those cliches that we have as a society in terms of who should be caring for our children? And of course, there have been a whole host of very constructive developments over a period of decades, but I think we go back to that fundamental perception that it's the role of the mother to care for children, and then that has implications for the workforce and the childcare sector, because so far we have failed to persuade men to come and work in the early years sector, and I think part of challenging these cliches as to who cares is that we encourage more men to come and work in the early years sector. Now, that in and of itself relates to challenging negative perceptions as to who cares, but there are also systemic reasons as to why men generally don't choose careers in the early years, and some of those challenges also face women. So pay rates are far too low in the sector, for example. There are workforce planning challenges when it comes to persuading individuals to gain qualifications so that they can come and work for us. And that's a challenge felt across the sector, but particularly in the Welsh medium sector. So I'm very pleased to see the report published by your committee. And I do believe that there's a great deal to be applauded within it, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss that a little later. But for me, we need to challenge that cliche as to who cares, and then look at some of the systemic problems that feeds those cliches too. If we can tackle those issues, then it will be far easier for us as a society to share responsibility for caring for our children and to ensure that that happens in a way which is far fairer than it is at present.
Very good. Jackie, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Well, I'm Jackie James and I work in the community in Cardiff. So I'm mainly in the Riverside area and I work for 2 different community centres and we work mainly with ethnic minority people. And when I looked at this report, I was really pleased actually, because there's a lot of things in there that I can see if it's done, you know, it'll be really great for the whole idea of childcare. I came into childcare quite late as an adult. Well, I call it late, it wasn't from a child. I had another career and then came into childcare. And I only came into childcare after I had my own children, when I found it so difficult myself to find someone to look after my children because I wanted to study and do something else. And so I was in the same boat as many, many, many parents find themselves in these days. And having to find care, I went to the person that most of us would go to would be our parents if they're around. So I was very lucky to have a mother who lived around the corner, who was able to look after my children while I managed to do some studying and enjoy then started working in childcare. When I look at childcare today, when you think of it, I mean, Gwenthyn is right. When I think of the amount of qualifications and studying and things you have to do to actually be in this business, in this, you know, sector, and then you look at the pay rate to go with it, it just doesn't match at all. And that is one of the things I see that's come out in this report, which I'm glad to see. And also the idea that we need more people from a younger age in schools. Do they talk about childcare as a career? In the schools, you know, what do they know about it? Is there anyone going in there telling these young people, look, this is a brilliant career that you can actually do and enjoy for the rest of your life? That sort of thing needs to be addressed. It needs to be looked at. And also the fact, as I'm from an ethnic minority background, where are all the other ethnic minority workers? And there are barriers there that's stopping them from doing childcare or play work or whatever. And it was really nice to read this report and see the different recommendations that have been laid out to go forward. And most of them I can say I'm really pleased with. If the Welsh Government gets on top of this, I would be a very happy person. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Laura Mcguire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Laura. I'm a single parent of 3 girls, and I'm a member of a group called Single Parents Wales, which is how I heard about the original focus group. I was really, really pleased to have a chance of expressing my voice because, for 2 reasons mainly, my own personal hurdles and the barriers I faced trying to forge a career, trying to provide for my children as a single parent, and pay my mortgage, pay my bills, and be a role model. I want to go out to work. I want my children to see me forge a career for myself. But with parents, my parents are 2.5 hours away. I had to find alternative childcare. So I faced huge hurdles doing that. And I, on a weekly basis, I still face hurdles. As a mum of 3 daughters in particular, I want them to feel confident that they can, in the future, be a parent and have a career. And at the moment, all they see is the huge juggling act that I face on a weekly basis, and that doesn't fill them with confidence that they can have the 2. And I want them, whatever they've, my eldest is doing her GCSEs. I don't want her to feel, what is the point in doing this? Because at one point I'm going to have to make the choice. I think the report is amazing, and I love the idea of reaching out to new parents for childcare options, but I do think we need to go before that and hit kids when they're in education and say you can have both, especially women. I think that's really important, and I'm really, really pleased to see the progress that's been made.
Thank you very much indeed. Seanette Williams, would you like to introduce yourself?
Diolch, Jenny. Seanette Williams.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Seanette Williams. I'm a member of the Senedd representing South Wales West. I'm a newly elected member. I was elected in May, and I'm also a member of the committee that drew up this report and took evidence as part of that work. And before I talk about that, I would like to share a little of my own personal story, because I had to take a career break because there was no childcare available for me. My parents didn't live close enough, and my father was unwell, and my husband's parents lived many hours away, so it simply wasn't an option. And the cost, the hours that I worked, I was a journalist, I didn't work 9 to 5, so it was impossible for me to continue with my career. And the cost, and I did work part-time for many years, and the cost of childcare wasn't affordable, and I was in quite a well-paid role, but it simply wasn't affordable for me to return full-time and to pay for full-time childcare. So I do think we need to tackle this. Clearly, it affects some families more than others, low-income families, families with additional needs, different families working to different patterns, but I do think it impacts virtually all working women. So it is something that we must address from a number of different perspectives. So I was very interested and very proud of the fact that we as a committee were looking at this issue. Last week, we were discussing a State of the Nation report with officials from Chwarae Teg, the women's equality movement, and it's a report that looks annually at how equal the genders are in Wales, and it considers the latest statistics which measure inequality in terms of gender. And I asked officials, what would be the one thing that would make the greatest difference in terms of closing that gender pay gap and tackling the inequalities that disproportionately impact women? What would improve women's opportunities in the workplace when they are working and in society more generally? And the response was quite simply free childcare for all, and that should be available from the early years, at least 12 months, if not sooner. Because report after report has shown us that that would not only tackle gender inequalities, but it would also help to tackle poverty, something that our committee is also looking at. So that's the ideal, that's the gold standard, if you like. But of course, it is something that we have to work towards. And what inspired us as a committee to look at this was the statistics that we saw and the experiences that I heard expressed from my own female friends in terms of how the pandemic revealed the huge weaknesses in the childcare provision. That structure that was helping women back into work was just destroyed for a period. And then, of course, the way in which the burden of care on women was intensified by the pandemic, and that became clear. So this was clear to us as an Equalities Committee that we needed to look at this. And of course, it's important to note that we as a committee decided on this inquiry before the cooperation agreement between my party, Plaid Cymru, and the Labour government was agreed. But of course, as the inquiry gathered pace, it gave additional significance to our inquiry and to our recommendations, and I do very much hope that the report will be able to steer the operations of this new policy included within the cooperation agreement in terms of extending free childcare. In the agreement, it's for children from 2 years old in the first instance, but I know that many organisations looking at this issue, and my party too, wants to see that going further.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for the introductions. I want to thank the 4 people who've submitted questions in advance, but anybody who's on the call can, of course, submit questions to us so that we can address your issues, or if you want to ask something specific about something that one of the panelists has said and to clarify their response or to challenge it, or whatever you want to say. But in the first instance, let's just look at those who've submitted questions in advance. There's a very nice one here which will be very familiar to both Jackie James and Laura Mcguire, which is a question from Sophie. I work in my local council in a supervisory role, so obviously not one of the lowest paid members of staff, but will only bring up home about £1 an hour when I return to my role after maternity leave due to the cost of childcare. But I'm unable to earn enough to survive on statutory maternity pay. So what can the Welsh Government do to stop this way in which it is disadvantaging women and leaving them vulnerable? Laura, would you like to start? Because I'm sure that feels terribly familiar to you.
Yeah, no problem. It is absolutely rings very true. I went back to work when my youngest was 7 months old. Due to having 3 children, my childcare bill was £800 a month, and I earned just over £1,000 a month. So obviously that wasn't anywhere near enough. I was fortunate enough to receive some tax credits, but still was a huge struggle. I made the decision to muddle through and stick at it because I knew one day it would get easier, and my absolute determination to get up, go to work every day, and for my children to see me do that pushed me through it. It did mean that we weren't able to have the lifestyle that I would like to have for my children. We did struggle financially. I got myself into levels of debt, which I'm still catching up from now, and all because I wanted to work. I have a degree and I worked hard for it, and I have, like I said, 3 daughters that I want to be a role model for, and I am taking aside the fact that I'm a parent. I'm an educated woman who wants to forge a career for herself. I have something to offer in the workplace, and I enjoy my work. It improves my mental health on a daily basis, to leave the house, to have that routine, to work with others. I work with teenagers in a secondary school. I help them with their literacy, and I feel it's an important role, and I absolutely love it. But I've had to make huge sacrifices to get to this point. So I completely understand. All I would say to the person asking this question is hang on in there. You can do it. And to the Welsh Government, please offer more help, because it shouldn't be this hard.
Okay. Obviously, the Welsh Government doesn't control the amount of money paid in statutory maternity pay, and we don't control the taxation system, the income tax system in this country. That's very much the job of the UK government. But I'll turn to you, Seanette. What do you think the Welsh Government can do in this current situation, given that the Welsh Government does not set the policy of how much people can retain of their pay from paying income tax?
Na, yn anffodus, ond
No, unfortunately, but I do think that one of the things that came through very clearly in the evidence that we took from mothers like Laura in those focus groups that we arranged was that the system at present is very inconsistent across Wales. What you pay is not standardised across Wales for almost any kind of care, and it's clear that much of the provision in schools, even that provision for pre and after school care, is not standardised and isn't always affordable for every family. At the moment, some schools provide this, but not all schools, where perhaps you could have a policy where low-income families pay less for after-school activities or clubs, or that they should be free of charge. So I would like to see the Welsh Government implementing a system where, in terms of those areas where it does have control, and that relates mainly to care provided under local authorities and through the education system, that they should standardise what we pay and to make it affordable. And of course, I would want to see some sort of framework where everyone would know how much they're going to pay, and it wouldn't vary from one town to another, and even where it's provided through the private sector, that prices are consistent and standards are consistent. So it doesn't matter where you live, you'll know how much childcare will cost and what the standard of that care will be, because what we don't want is that there is higher quality care available to those who can afford it. It should be the same for all children, whatever they pay, or even if they don't pay. So that's what I would like to see, that regulatory framework that the Welsh Government could perhaps try and provide. Now, I lived in the United States for a time, and we know that the United States is no sort of model for welfare or any sort of social care indeed. But what they did do in some enlightened counties was to provide what they called enrichment programs. And I'm pleased to see that some of this is permeating through in Wales now, where you had activities for children, both preschool and after school, and they fitted into the work pattern. They didn't finish at 3 or 4, they finished at 6 o'clock. And they were of a very high quality, but there was one subsidized payment that everyone paid, and those from low-income families didn't pay anything at all. So I do think that there are things that the government can do in order to ensure that childcares and different kinds of childcares are consistent and affordable.
Very good. Should we move on to, because we've got 2 more questions have come in, so that's all fantastic, and keep them flowing. We've got a question here from Kyle. What are the pitfalls in regard to childcare and parental employment in general? Gwenllian, obviously you have quite a wide remit in your role, and I wondered if you could think about and let us know what you think are the pitfalls, or we've listened to some of the advantages already. So
yeah. Wel, dwi'n meddwl mae un broblem.
Well, I think that one quite common problem is that there is a lack of understanding of how complex the childcare system is and how harsh the rules and regulations are. And that's quite understandable, because what any childcare provider does is to look after those individuals in our lives that are most important to us. So it's not an easy system to be operating within. And that is then reflected in my view, in a lack of respect towards the sector, because you will often hear people say things like, well, anyone can be a childcare provider, without understanding all of the as Jackie said earlier, all of the qualifications that one has to study for, and the particular kind of personality and character it takes to look after a room full of children. It's not something that I could do when I have 4 children under 9 at home. So I think there's a lack of respect towards the sector, a lack of understanding of how challenging the work is. And also there is a gap, because as we've heard, on the one hand, we all recognise that the childcare system is expensive, but on the other hand, the staff aren't properly paid, and there is insufficient financial reward to them. So where's that money going to? Well, it's going to maintain a baseline of quality in all the requirements in terms of staff ratios, which is policed very strictly and quite rightly so. So without some sort of revolution in funding, then I'm not sure how some of these problems can be ironed out. And I have to say, since the publication of the report, there have been some very constructive announcements that have been made. For example, increasing the funding rate for the childcare offer, moving towards standardizing the system for early years, flying start and childcare. So we're certainly moving in the right direction, but I do think that we have to return to that fundamental question of how we respect the people who give their lives to look after young children, and that we give more status to that sort of career. And the easiest way of doing that is by increasing salaries in the sector. So I hope that that does respond to the question to a certain extent, but I think having this sort of discussion too is a great help in raising awareness as to just how complex the sector is, and that we start to see progress and we start to see moves in the right direction. And we must bear in mind that it's only been available for a little over 4 years in terms of the childcare offer. So it's not surprising that we are yet to crack some of these challenges. I hope that when we look back in 2027, having been through a decade of provided government-funded childcare, that we will be able to see that some of these challenges will have been overcome. It's going to take time for a number of very complex reasons.
Thank you. Jackie, there's a question here from Caris about the different ways of working that we've got used to during the lockdown. So how concerned should we be that the move back to work from offices could detract from the flexibility that has developed in a number of workplaces in terms of coming and going to collect children, etc., and that this could pose to be a step backwards in terms of the work-life balance? So I wonder if you have anything you can tell us about how people, the parents of the children that you've been looking after, how they've been managing during the lockdown, and whether you think that this flexibility might be at risk.
Right, during the lockdown, one of the community centres I work for, Women Connect First in Riverside, we did provide a lot of online activities for the children, and the parents were really grateful for it, because obviously they were doing their schoolwork and they had to do their work as well, and it was a very difficult time for the parents. Now I know many of them are going back into work. Some are still able to do this flexibility of working from home and going in. But I can see the difficulty there with some of them, because they have to get back into that routine of going to collect the children from school, finding childcare for them. Because if we think it was 18 months of lockdown, I can't remember how long it was now, but it was quite a long time where there was nothing. Everything was shut down. So there was nowhere for them to take their children. So they have to get the children back into a routine of going into some sort of care. The flexibility, some employers, I can see they're okay. They're going back to the flexibility of allowing them to be able to finish early as they did before. But I do feel that there are some employers who actually like the idea of their employers working from home, because it saved them a lot on money if they were office workers. It saved them a lot on that. So that the parents are then at home, and it's difficult when you're at home with children. It's harder. I think it's much harder than if you're in the office. So it could be a step backward for some people. Most of the people that I work with, though, I must admit, they have the problem similar to the question before, where they're on low pay and they're doing zero-hour contracts, odd working hours, shift work and all that. And for them to be able to get any help with their childcare is almost non-existent, because they just don't even come into that category. And it's very, very difficult. And I would hope actually that after the lockdown, many adults, when they had to look after their children, I did have many adults coming back and saying, oh my goodness, I don't know how you do it, Jackie, because they had their children home every day. And they were like, oh, how do you manage with all these kids? I can't cope with mine. Do you know what I mean? And I was hoping that they've got a little bit more insight, as Gwenllian say, and a little bit more respect for what we do every single day. And it's even, you know, when they have children with disabilities, because a lot of the children who were at home and, you know, they couldn't go in and they had autism and the parents have got to look after them every day. Very, 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 very difficult. And I feel that we've got a little bit more, Gwenllian, I hope, a little bit more respect has come there now from parents and from employers, because they realise the difficulty. These employers who stay at home with their children are realising the difficulty that that parents have with educating their children at home. And I'm really hoping we don't go backwards, but that we continue forwards, because caring for our children is so, so important for their overall development, really, really important. And we need to get that in everyone's head going forward.
Thank you. Gwenllian, could you just pick up on the point that Jackie has made about people who work zero-hour contracts, flexible working, for whom the current childcare offer simply doesn't cut it, you know, that doesn't enable them to pick up any of the benefits of the childcare offer at the moment. And I wonder if you could just tell us how you think that might change without undermining children's rights not to be sort of taken from pillar to post the whole time.
Ia, mae hynna'n mynd yn ôl â ni.
Yes, and that takes us back to that point that childcare provision relates to many different things, the foundational economy on the one hand, and the development of the child on the other. And we know from charities such as Save the Children and from research by Colegau Cymru how important quality childcare is for the development and well-being of children. In terms of the childcare offer itself, I think I'm right in saying that by now, an individual who works on a zero-hour contract can show evidence to the Welsh Government of that fact, and they should then qualify for the childcare offer. And of course, only this week there was an announcement that the childcare offer is to be expanded as a result of the cooperation agreement to include individuals in training, and that will come into force from September onwards. So we are seeing some steps in trying to fill those gaps that already exist. In terms of flexibility, I think, if I can return to a point that Seanette made, how do you provide for families and mothers, particularly who work antisocial hours or unusual hours, and to an extent the point on flexibility feeds into that too, because if you don't have core hours, like me for example, I don't have core hours, I can work whenever I choose. Now, does this help us, or does it make life more difficult in trying to access childcare at 7 o'clock in the evening when I'm participating in a panel discussion such as this? But I think fundamentally that move towards flexibility by employers should make things easier, and we as employers and as workers should remind ourselves and each other that we all have a fundamental right to ask our employers to work flexibly. And as an employer myself, I find it difficult in understanding why one wouldn't allow that in order to help individuals to strike that balance between home life and work. And perhaps we don't discuss the role of men in all of this enough. Where are the fathers? What's their role in terms of supporting care in the home and indeed care provision in cylchoedd meithrin, play groups, and so on and so forth?
Thank you. Laura, is there anything you want to add on this issue of the inflexibility of the current arrangements?
I'm fortunate enough to work school hours, which is wonderful. So I have breakfast with my children every day and tea with them, obviously, then every evening. However, I have a term time only contract, but my childcare contract means that even though I have 13 weeks off unpaid each year, I still have to pay 52 weeks of the year childcare because I was unable and still am unable to be able to get any other kind of contract that allows the permanence that I need, because I don't want to be changing one academic year to the other childcare providers, because my children are everything and I'm very confident with my current childcare provider, so I've just had to suck it up and pay it for the last few years. I also think that although obviously early years is incredibly important to ensure that the childcare provision, but I don't think much thought is gone into the fact that even once they're in secondary school, they are still very, very much children. So, for example, if my 11-year-old needs provision and I have to work, there is no real childcare options for her. She still needs to be with an adult, a qualified adult, and yet where do I put her that's safe, that's appropriate for her age? She still can't, I can't just leave her in the house because she's just 11, even though she's suddenly in secondary school. She still needs that support. If I have meetings, I don't finish work until an hour after her school finishes, so I still have to arrange provision, and I'm finding that incredibly difficult.
Thank you for that. That's really useful. I'm going to now pose a slightly harder question, which is for Seanette and myself, which is how well is your political party doing in equality of outcome for women? And that's a question from somebody called Rhiannon. Thank you, Rhiannon, for that question. Seanette, would you like to start off?
Wel, ddim digon da.
Well, not well enough is the honest answer. And I am very proud to see within the cooperation agreement that we are looking at working towards gender quotas in terms of how we're represented in the Senedd in the future. Because unless we can get it right in the Senedd, where hopefully we actually set the tone in terms of policy and culture for our nation, then it's not looking particularly hopeful. But we're not doing well enough at the moment, because I'm 50, and I'll say this honestly, and I don't want to put anyone off, but of course every woman's situation is different and every family is different, but I wouldn't be able to have undertaken this role when my children were younger, and that's the plain truth, and that shouldn't be the case. And perhaps I wouldn't have been selected as a candidate either, when I was a younger woman, because we all know that a number of women take career breaks because of childcare issues and other problems that we've already discussed this evening, and the barriers that we've also discussed. And therefore, that does have an impact on your confidence. It certainly had an impact on my confidence, I'll be honest about that, in terms of putting myself forward as a candidate. And I think that political parties, including my own, do have to provide more support, more encouragement, and more opportunities for women to contribute to party political activities, but also they should be supported in practical ways. I remember wanting to attend my party conference and there was no childcare available. It can be as simple as that, as superficial as that, if you like. And there's no creche in the Senedd. And I live an hour and a half, almost an hour and a half away. And it would be impossible for me to attend plenary and vote and to get back home before 8 in the evening on a Tuesday and Wednesday. So there are major fundamental challenges in politics that need to be resolved.
I'm going to come in here. I was involved in the early feminist movements of the late 60s, early 70s, where one of the main demands of the women's movement was free childcare. Well, we haven't managed to achieve that, but what we have managed to achieve is much more understanding and awareness amongst political parties that women aren't going to go away and they aren't going to tolerate the position that we used to be in. My own mother, when she got married, she was told, well, that you've got to train this person who's going to replace you. You know, it was that brutal that most people could not stay in the jobs they were in after they were married. It was just considered not correct. So that doesn't happen any longer. But we had a real fight. Our ancestors had a huge fight, A, to get the vote, and B, to get child benefit. Originally, they were called family allowances. And that is society's contribution to children and to the role that mothers play, particularly when they've, they in the early stages of their child's development. Well, child benefit has been allowed to wither on the vine. It hasn't been properly uprated since 2010. And in a previous Labour government, there was a massive increase in child benefit under Gordon Brown's direction as Chancellor of the Exchequer, but only after we had an absolutely massive row in 1997, which I was personally involved in, where there was a proposal to cut lone parent benefits. Laura Mcguire, I'm sure you understand that obviously being a single parent is much more expensive than being having two wage earners in the household. I think the short answer to this is that we're not going to get anything unless we fight for it. Just as, the Ford women upholsterers in 1968 who went on strike because they didn't get equal pay. Well, it is now illegal to not pay equal pay, but we still have a huge problem with women mainly being in the jobs that are least well paid and men predominantly in the best paid jobs. So there's an awful lot more to do. We need to keep going. So I think there's some questions that have been put into the question and answer session. So one of them is from Sarah Rees. Work is the main route out of poverty. How can women return to work if they can only access childcare once they get a job? The upfront payments are a huge barrier, as well as long waiting lists. What can be done to support those looking for work with childcare? Who would like to start first on this? Laura, do you want to start, and then I'll go to Jackie, and I'll go around on this one.
I know from being part of the Single Parents Wales group that this is a huge hurdle for many women. You know, they've gone and put themselves forward for a job, and that takes confidence after many knockbacks, perhaps in a personal level. And you know, if they're successful, then they manage to secure childcare, which again isn't always easy depending on the area that you live in. And then, as I was, we're expected to pay a month in advance before we've even got our first paycheck. Now, after being on maternity leave and scraping through that, you just don't have, in what my case was, £800 spare before you even get back into work. I was fortunate enough to be able to get hold of that money, but not everyone is. And then you're faced with a choice between, well, you're in a rock and a hard place. You want to improve life for yourself and your children, and yet you're forced to perhaps give up the job, claim benefits, and take a career break until perhaps your children are in school. And that shouldn't really be the case, because your confidence is knocked. You can experience mental health problems. There's loads of different issues with housing and so on that you can get yourself into. Having a mortgage myself, there's only certain benefits that are applicable if you have a mortgage. So if there was some kind of scheme available in whereby you could have a grant for that first month, then that would be a huge benefit, and it give the confidence for people to actually apply for the jobs in the first place.
Okay, so on the recently, the Welsh Government announced, Julie Morgan, the Deputy Minister for Social Services, announced that for those people who have 3 and 4 year olds who at the moment is a benefit confined to people who are in work, from September the offer is going to be expanded to parents who are in education and training as well. And that was in the Welsh Labour manifesto in the run up to the elections last May. So how big a difference do you think that'll make to enable women to go back to work quicker, or parents to go back to work quicker? Jackie, first of all, and then I'll come to Gwen Clean.
I'm really pleased to hear it's going to be extended, because when I had my children, luckily, unlike most people, I had my parents who lived around the corner. And there are many people who haven't got anyone around who could look after their children. So I was able to do that for a time. But then I decided to actually go into childcare myself. That was the route that I decided to take. Okay, there's no one out there properly to look after my children. I'll do it myself. So I decided to go into childcare and get trained in that. And I started off as a childminder. It is very difficult for parents at the moment, and for this lady here, it's really hard, because the cost of childcare as well is quite expensive for a lot of people who just can't afford it. So she's asking about returning to work. Very difficult. Most people do take a gap, but there are times when you can't afford to take a gap. You have to do that, and then you end up relying on family, on friends, on everyone else. So I'm really glad to hear that, for a start, because this seems the start. Julie Morgan said it's going to be extended for education and training, because sometimes that's what they need. I needed that little bit of education. So luckily, as I say, I had my parents around the corner. If I didn't have them, I wouldn't have been able to do the education to even get me into where I am. So that is a start, I think, at the moment, a start for us to, from September, you say that will be great. That
yes,
will be
from
started. Yeah, that will make a big difference to a lot of people. There are still some people, obviously, who, like this lady in the question, who we won't be able to help, but that will make a big difference, because many people, I changed my career, actually. I was in catering to begin with, Then after I had my 2 children, I changed career because it suddenly dawned on me, I'm working all these hours. Who's going to look after my children? What am I going to do? And I ended up changing to a childcare career. I know it seems ridiculous, a childcare career to look after my children, but it's been great. I absolutely love it. And this is a great help. This is a start. This is a start that they'll be able to have while in education and training. That is a big start to start off with. Let's hope it progresses even better.
Okay, so the same questioner from Sarah Rees, a second question is, when are we going to get the update on the commitment for childcare for 2-year-olds? And how do we address the issue that women are forced out of work unless they can get childcare support at the point when parental pay ends? So Gwen Clean, I just want to turn to you, because this is also about the capacity of the childcare system to expand, you know, at a rate where we're not putting quality at risk. So, we've got 2 elements of expansion, one that's already been announced starting in September, and obviously other people want to know when's the offer for 2-year-olds going to start happening.
Wel, yn gyntaf, da ni'n croesawu...
Well, first of all, we welcome that move very warmly. And indeed, in the Mudiad Meithrin manifesto before the last Senedd elections, we were hoping to see a system that would introduce childcare for children at 12 months. But we have to recognise that there is an additional problem here, namely that a large percentage of parents who qualify today for the childcare offer for 3- and 4-year-olds aren't taking advantage of that childcare offer. Why is that the case? And that's why I am so pleased to see that the first recommendation in the committee's report is to raise awareness of the existence of the childcare offer among parents who do qualify, because clearly there is something going wrong somewhere in the fact that the percentage isn't as high as one would expect. Now, it's possible that part of the reason for that is capacity, which is one of the points that Sarah raised in her question. And part of our role as Mudiad Meithrin and the other Colum partners is to create capacity. But it takes us back to that issue on the challenges of recruitment to the workforce and the need to see more people becoming qualified, particularly in terms of Welsh medium provision. Some fortnight ago, Mudiad Meithrin published a policy document which identifies some of the solutions as we see them in terms of increasing the number of individuals within the workforce who could lead and create more capacity. And one of the interesting projects that we are working with Clwbiau Plant Cymru Kids Clubs is to provide more provision pre and after school, which responds to some of the issues that Laura outlined earlier. And I know that the out of school sector really has faced huge challenges during the pandemic. And as we came out of the pandemic too, because of the reluctance of a number of schools to allow childcare to happen on the school sites, rightly or wrongly. So none of this is easy. And without a sector and without staff in the sector who are qualified and feel that they are respected and that they are properly paid for what they do, then I don't see an easy way of dealing with some of these problems. And that's why the report is so very important, because there is an understanding here on staffing issues in recommendation 12, the need to increase salaries in recommendation 14. And the most fundamental point there is, why do qualified parents not take advantage of the provision that's available to them now?
Good question. Another question has come up from an anonymous contributor. which is about the split in the childcare offer. They, on the one hand, this person, their child has early years provision in school from 9 in the morning till 11:20, and then it's topped up with private nursery, which requires her to collect from one setting to get the child to the other. Laura, as you work in a school, are you familiar with this process, and does that happen where you work?
I work in a secondary school, so that's a different environment. However, with my own children, I would have loved to have kept the children in one setting during the school day, but the school in my area, they don't allow that as an option. So I had to have a private childminder before and after school, which was a lot more costly than if the school had adequate provision. I don't work very long hours, and yet I'm still having to pay several hours a day childcare because of the way the school day works. So yes, I'm very aware of my children having to go to 2 different settings throughout the school day. And because of the difference between infants and junior schools in my area as well, you've got to take into consideration things like inset days. So they don't communicate with each other. So we've got different inset days. So I have to pay then a full day's provision. And at one point I had 3 children in 3 different schools, and each having different inset days. No capacity to be able to take care of them myself because I worked in a different school. So I was having to pay throughout a period of a month, 3 days full worth of childcare. So I was majorly in negative during those days before I'd even started to go to work. So yeah, there's a lot to consider with different settings. And when you're on your own, I which I literally am, and many people in the Single Parents Wales group that I'm part of in the same position, we don't have family to depend on. We don't have a partner that is able to do those days. Childcare is the only option.
Thank you for that. We're coming towards the end, so I'm going to come to each of you, slightly different questions, but if you can think about the one thing you think that needs to change. Anyway, this is a question for Seanette, I think, because it's quite a political one. 31% of children in Wales living in poverty. The current offer discriminates against children who are barred from the childcare scheme because of their parents' employment status. So do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, ac fe glywon ni dystiolaeth.
Yes, and we as a committee heard evidence on the issue that we've just been discussing, namely that barrier in returning to work, that you are not qualified if you're unemployed, and that can be a barrier then in terms of returning to the workplace. And as Gwen Llian mentioned earlier, I think we're not talking here just about opportunities for mothers or parents. Of course, the way out of poverty is work, but also we know that children from low-income families benefit in terms of their development when they can access high-quality childcare, and that in turn will help them to reach their potential and hopefully will lead them out of their circumstances. So all of these things are related. Personally, I would like to, and we have talked about the steps being taken at the moment with the childcare offer, and I do hope, and we heard evidence from Sweden, for example, where it's entirely natural to have very flexible, affordable childcare available across the board. So hopefully someday we can reach that point. But it is a step-by-step process, I acknowledge that, and I do think that the Women's Equality Network discussed this in their own evidence, as did Chwarae Teg, that we need to understand how extending free childcare to people who aren't in work could be beneficial in so many different ways.
Very good. So there was a final question from Kamar. Why are women so amazing, and what benefits would a better system of childcare have on society and the economy? So, Jackie, would you like to go next? What do you think? We can agree women are amazing, but what is the one thing that you want to see done so that we have a better system and a better society?
Well, yes, I agree. We are absolutely amazing. And the amount of things that we juggle about. Better system for childcare. Actually, the economy would grow much better if we had better childcare. Look how many amazing women are at home and they can't work because of the hours of work and because of the childcare. I have people in work, they can work during term time, but come holiday time, and you know how many school holidays there are through the year, then they have to pay out, you know, amount for childminders, etc., which costs a lot. And if they can't do that, then they're not working. I myself took time off work. Luckily, during that time, I was able to study to go into the childcare industry, actually, from one to another. But if we had more parents, more, how can I put it, more decent childcare, in the fact that we have children. I look after children in creche, so they come to us from like 6 months and onwards. And in my work, we're helping parents to get back into work. It would have an enormous effect on our economy, because if you look at all the parents, single parents, whether they're single or not, who are studying and want to get into work, they have so much to give. Thank you. So much to give, but haven't got the childcare in order to give it.
Thank you. That's a really important point. Thank you for making that. Gwen, would you like to go next? What is the one thing you want to see changed?
Okay, so bod chydig bach yn chwaraeus.
Well, if I can be slightly cheeky and say that perhaps we don't want to be that amazing and carry all of that emotional burden of trying to juggle everything. And that's why we need a childcare system that works for our benefit as women too. So personally, I'm very pleased to see the increase in the rates for the childcare provision that's just been announced. But if I did have a magic wand, I don't, unfortunately, but I would increase that funding again and pay salaries to childcare staff which would be comparable to what's seen as an entirely normal salary for teachers, for example.
Thank you very much. Laura, what would you like to see to make a much better system and which would improve society and the economy?
Yeah, so I'd like to see more confidence in women to be able to apply for jobs without, you know, knowing that they're supported to have childcare provision that's adequate, but also confidence in our young women who are going through education currently, who to know that all their hard work in school, in extracurricular activities, isn't going to be in vain, that they're not going to face the same barriers that my children see that I have to face on a daily basis with my juggling act, to know that it is worthwhile, that their careers can be achieved, that they can be both mothers and successful in whatever their field is in the future. I don't see why they can't have both.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think that's an excellent conclusion, we clearly want an affordable childcare system that's universal, like we have in Sweden. We clearly need to, we know that will then strengthen the economy and enable more women to stay in the workplace. We clearly need to fight for making the funding of childcare a higher priority in society. And as Laura says, we need more confident women who are going to be able to make an even greater contribution to society. So happy International Women's Day tomorrow to everybody, and we need to keep up the fight.